Dear listeners, I welcome you to my channel. Leave your comments and impressions, I value your opinion. David Miller, an acclaimed software developer in Silicon Valley, had always considered his life close to perfect. A beautiful home, a flourishing career, and most importantly, a loving wife, Rachel, who was his college sweetheart. Yet beneath the veneer of this idyllic life, a storm was brewing. One that David was blissfully unaware of until that fateful evening. It was a chilly Tuesday night, and David had just wrapped up a grueling project meeting. He decided to surprise Rachel by arriving home early, hoping to spend some quality time together. As he pulled into their driveway, his heart was light, filled with anticipation of a quiet night in with the love of his life. David gently pushed open the front door, the familiar creak louder than usual in the silent house. He was met with darkness and an eerie quiet. "Rachel," he called out softly, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. No response. He frowned, a sliver of unease creeping into his heart as he walked towards the kitchen. There, on the marble island, lay Rachel's smartphone, buzzing and lighting up with an incoming call. Curiosity overcame his initial hesitation, and he glanced at the screen, freezing when he saw the caller ID flash Jean. Without thinking, David picked up the phone and answered, his voice calm. "Hello. Hey love. Just checking if you're all set for next week's trip to New York." The man's voice was cheerful, oblivious to the fact that he wasn't speaking to Rachel. David's mind raced. New York? Rachel had mentioned a business trip, but she had said it was a solo trip for a conference. "Who is this?" David managed to ask, his voice betraying a hint of his confusion and growing suspicion. "Oh sorry, I must have dialed the wrong number." The man quickly hung up. David stood frozen, staring at the phone in his hand. A whirlwind of emotions tore through him, but he needed answers. He did something he had never done before. He invaded Rachel's privacy. Opening her messages, he found an entire thread of texts with Jean, and then another with someone named Eric. His heart sank as he read message after message, detailing Rachel's affairs with not just Jean, but also Eric whenever she was away on business. The last message to her friend was what cut the deepest. "Darling, I'm having a great time with Jean, but when he's not available, I share the bed with Eric. But that's only when I'm on a business trip. At home I'm a faithful wife." Anger, betrayal, and pain coursed through David's veins as he read those words. His perfect life crumbled in an instant. He needed to confront Rachel, but he also wanted her to realize the magnitude of her betrayal on her own terms. Over the next few days, David crafted his plan meticulously. He contacted Jean and Eric, revealing who he was and arranging for both of them to surprise Rachel on her next-to-post solo business trip. The stage was set for her facade to come crashing down. Finally, the day arrived. David drove Rachel to the airport, kissed her goodbye, and watched as she disappeared through the security gates. The image of her unaware smile etched painfully in his mind. Later, hidden away just out of sight at the hotel where Rachel was staying, David waited. Soon he saw Jean arriving, followed by Eric. He texted Rachel from a burner phone. "Welcome to your Armageddon." As he watched the events unfold from afar, the confrontation, the tears, and the ultimate realization of her folly, David felt no satisfaction. Watching the woman he once loved become a wreck was not a victory. It was a tragedy of his own making. But it was a necessary end to their chapter, a step towards closure, or perhaps a new beginning. The lobby of the sleek Manhattan hotel buzzed with the typical energy of a weekday morning. Businessmen and women, international tourists, and even a few families filled the space with an amalgam of accents and conversations. Amidst all this, Rachel, oblivious to the storm heading her way, checked in at the front desk, her confident demeanor untouched by the imminent confrontation. Meanwhile, David, seated in a nearby lounge, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, watched intently. His heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. As Rachel disappeared into the elevator, he texted Jean and Eric to proceed. Minutes felt like hours as David waited. The plan was simple yet risky: confront Rachel with both men at once, exposing her lies in a dramatic showdown. His phone buzzed. A text from Jean confirmed they were in position. It was time. David moved to a position where he could better see the upcoming scene. As he reached the designated floor, the sound of raised voices halted him. He peeked around the corner to see Rachel standing in the hallway, her face a mixture of shock and anger. "Why are both of you here?" Rachel's voice trembled, the facade of control cracking. Jean, a tall, lean man with sharp features, spoke first. David invited us, Rachel. He knows everything. Eric, broader and with a more imposing presence, added bitterly. Did you think you could play us all forever? Rachel's eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. She spotted David then, his figure a silent accusation. David, she started, but her words faltered under his steely gaze. This is the end, Rachel, David interrupted, his voice low and devoid of warmth. I wanted you to see the destruction you've caused firsthand. As Rachel faced the men, her composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face, not just for the confrontation, but for the realization of her isolated predicament. Before more could be said, another figure approached the tense group. A woman in her late 30s, with sharp business attire and an authoritative air, addressed them. Is there a problem here? She inquired, her tone commanding attention. Rachel wiped her eyes, looking at the newcomer. No, Rebecca. We were just. Rebecca, who David recognized as the hotel manager from his prior arrangements, didn't look convinced. This doesn't seem like nothing. If this is a personal matter, I must ask you to take it somewhere private or leave the hotel. David nodded, understanding the need to de-escalate the situation publicly. He motioned for everyone to follow him to a nearby conference room he had preemptively reserved. Once inside, the confrontation resumed, this time with more privacy. Why, Rachel? Why did you do it? David's question hung heavy in the room. Rachel, her face pale and eyes red, struggled for words. I don't know, David. It just happened. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. That's not good enough, David retorted, his disappointment evident. You've been living a double life at the expense of our marriage. The two other men stood silently, the anger in their eyes replaced by disillusionment. They too had believed in a reality that Rachel had crafted so skillfully. As the meeting ended, David walked out, leaving Rachel to face Jean and Eric alone. This chapter of his life needed closure, and he was determined to start anew, learning from the painful lessons of trust and betrayal. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the personal drama unfolding within the hotel walls. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his wedding ring in his pocket. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but necessary for healing and moving forward. The aftermath of the confrontation left Rachel reeling, alone in the dimly lit conference room. Jean and Eric had left shortly after David, each carrying a mix of anger and betrayal. Rachel sat, her thoughts chaotic and overwhelming, until the door clicked softly behind her. Rebecca, the hotel manager who had earlier intervened, stepped in. Her stern expression had softened somewhat. Are you okay? She asked, her tone more compassionate than before. Rachel looked up, surprised by the concern. I don't know, she stammered, wiping her eyes. Listen, Rebecca began, sitting opposite Rachel. I don't know the details of what happened, nor do I need to. But if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Sometimes strangers can offer unexpected comfort. Rachel hesitated but then nodded, her defenses slowly crumbling under the weight of her isolation. She recounted the story, her voice trembling. As she spoke, Rebecca listened intently, her face a mask of neutrality. When Rachel finished, Rebecca spoke, her voice thoughtful. It sounds like you've been juggling more than you could handle. But it's not too late to change things, to make amends. I don't know if I can, Rachel murmured. David won't want to see me, not after today. Maybe not, Rebecca agreed, but you can start by fixing what you can, and maybe find out why you did what you did. Understanding might help you move forward. Their conversation was interrupted by Rachel's phone buzzing violently on the table. It was a message from David. Meet me at the park by the river. We need to talk. Alone. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. He wants to meet, she whispered, a glimmer of hope rising. Then you should go, Rebecca encouraged, offering a small smile. But remember, whatever happens, you're taking steps to mend things. That's what counts. Rachel left the hotel with a mix of anxiety and relief, heading to the park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the paths, and the river reflected the fading light. She found David on a secluded bench overlooking the water. David looked up as she approached, his face was unreadable. Thank you for coming, he said simply. I had to, Rachel replied, taking a cautious seat beside him. I owe you an explanation. More than what I gave before. David nodded. I'm listening, he said, his voice neutral. Rachel took a deep breath. I was lost, David. I felt trapped in my role, always trying to be the perfect wife, the successful businesswoman. I thought I needed something different, an escape, but I was wrong. It wasn't freedom, it was just more cages. David listened silently, his gaze fixed on the river. After a long pause, he spoke. I appreciate your honesty. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it's a start. I know, Rachel agreed, her voice a whisper. I'm going to therapy. I'm trying to understand myself better. And I want to make things right, even if we don't go back to how things were. David sighed, looking back at her. I don't know what the future holds, Rachel, but I'm glad you're seeking help. For now, that's enough. The conversation shifted then, slowly from hurt and betrayal to tentative plans for individual healing. They talked until the stars began to appear, the atmosphere between them shifting, not to reconciliation, but to a mutual understanding of the need for personal growth. As they parted that evening, the air between them was not warm, but it was no longer cold with resentment. It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. Rachel walked away, knowing the road ahead was long and winding, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. Several months had passed since the fateful meeting at the park, and life had settled into a new rhythm for Rachel and David. They lived separately, focusing on individual therapy and personal growth. Their interactions, though limited, were cordial, a far cry from the icy exchanges of the past. One crisp autumn morning, Rachel received an unexpected call from Rebecca, the hotel manager who had become an unlikely confidant. Rachel, can you meet me today? There's something important we need to discuss. It's about David. Rebecca's voice was serious, tinged with urgency. Curiosity piqued, Rachel agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. When she arrived, Rebecca was already there, her expression solemn. Thank you for coming, she began, not wasting any time. I've debated whether to tell you this, but I think you should know. Rachel's heart raced, fearing more bad news. What is it about David? Rebecca took a deep breath. It's not just about David. It's about why he set up the meeting that day in the hotel. He knew about Jean and Eric not from overhearing or discovery messages. It was because Jean is actually my brother. Rachel stared, shocked. Your brother? But how does that involve David? He approached me, not as a stranger, but as a friend. We knew each other from business school. David came to me after he first suspected something was off. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I saw messages on Jean's phone one day when he left it unattended at my place, Rebecca explained. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Rachel asked, the hurt evident in her voice. I was protecting my brother at first, and I was angry at you too for hurting David. But as I saw you change and take responsibility, I realized that I was wrong to keep this from you, Rebecca admitted. Rachel absorbed the information, her mind reeling. So David orchestrated everything from the beginning. He wanted a confrontation. Not just any confrontation. He wanted to heal, to understand, to expose everything so there would be no more secrets. He thought it was the only way forward, Rebecca added. The revelation shifted something in Rachel. She felt a mix of betrayal and relief. Betrayal that David had manipulated the events to such an extent, yet relief that there were no more secrets lurking in the shadows. I need to speak to David, Rachel decided, standing up with a newfound resolve. She met David later that day in the same park where they had last spoken months ago. The air was cooler now, the leaves a tapestry of gold and red. Rebecca told me everything, Rachel said without preamble. Why didn't you tell me you knew all along? David looked at her, his eyes weary but kind. I was angry, hurt. I thought if I could control how it came out, maybe I could handle it better. I'm sorry, Rachel, it wasn't right. But at that time, it felt like the only way to face it all. Rachel nodded, the pieces of the past few months falling into place. And now? Where do we go from here? David took a moment before answering. I think we start anew. Not as husband and wife, but maybe as friends. We've both grown, changed. Maybe we can help each other continue to grow. Rachel considered his words, the autumn breeze lifting strands of her hair. She felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of secrets and lies. Yes. Let's start from there. Friends. As they walked together through the park, their steps in sync, a sense of peace settled over Rachel. The journey had been painful, fraught with betrayal and heartache, but it had led them here, to a place of honesty and potential new beginnings. Sometimes Rachel thought, the hardest paths lead to the brightest destinations.